people engaged, active in parks for their health and for the health of the park setting. We get people involved in all sorts of activities that again are led by the groups that best know the potential and understanding for the people with which they work. These people are, they're actually asylum seekers who are not yet refugees, and this was respite as part of their process of seeking asylum. It provided an opportunity for the caseworker to start to have a more meaningful discussion with the individuals, and it provided a fantastic entry to the fabulous experiences that are available for people in Australia. We've also engaged in many social activities, bringing groups into parks, providing them with opportunities to perform together, to eat together, to socialise together, whilst weaving in sorts of stories that we would like to convey to them. This particular group went to a park where there's a water reservoir. We were able to connect the message of water conservation to their day-to-day life. They could see this reservoir. Australia is a very dry country. We have a very dry climate, and water conservation is a very big issue for us. Many of the migrants that have maybe come from settings where water wasn't a particular factor, it wasn't a big constraint, or maybe have actually come through the refugee process and have not even had exposure to messages about sustainability. It's a very tangible, easy way of connecting the water up there with the tap in your home, and turn off the tap. The sorts of cultural events that we're getting in parks also draw in other visitors, so we're increasing visitation. We're providing more diverse opportunities. Another program with which we've worked is called Bilingual Guides. Bilingual Guides is a volunteer program for people from multicultural backgrounds to be trained in sustainable development, in understanding ecosystems, in understanding biodiversity, so that they can be the leads within their community. These bilingual guides have gone on to form a group, and we've had several of these programs, and these groups are providing tours for their communities and for other individuals as requested. We've engaged them in a number of activities, and this was a particular marine survey event that was occurring. The experience of being in parks for these communities is such a unique one. It provides a foundation in Australia that they may not have had through other processes. Australia is a unique resource, provides unique resources through safe, free, accessible parks. And part of what we are trying to do is to develop, it's going to be too hard with the time to explain this, but we're trying to shift people. We're trying to create a connection to one value and apply another value. It's a very simple model, but basically the concepts that are outlined in this particular diagram, if you can connect people with one set of the matrix of the pie chart, you can then migrate them into other important areas to connect them to other messages that you might want them to be involved with. So it's actually a really simple values chart, but we'll be applying this to our education programs and to our community programs. The future of learning about sustainable development is absolutely through the parks. This is what we know, and it's what we feel, and it's what we're involved with on a day-to-day basis. It resonates with government, it resonates with the community, and by building the capacity in the community sector, we're getting a broad array of advocates for the importance of parks. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilu. Please give Marilu again big hands. Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker from India. She's Preeti Kanautia, right? Program Coordinator, Center for Environmental Education, India. Please welcome her.
Thank you. It's nice to hear the right pronunciation of the name. What I am going to speak is about how Center for Environmental Education, which is an institution working in India, has worked with indigenous community in and apart. We are not working as a government department or any other university department, but we are working as an institution which has networked various stakeholders to work with indigenous community. Just introduce you briefly about what is this institution all about. We were established in 1984 and recognized by Ministry of Environment as Center of Excellence in Environmental Education. We are supported by Ministry of Environment, so it's an institution which works nationally and now also working internationally in various locations. And we are affiliated with Nehru Foundation for Development. Who know India will connect with the name of Nehru, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru. So it's on his name where this institution was established. What was our primary objective? We were looking at developing programs and materials which are focusing on environmental sustainable development. So there are a lot of programs for teachers, for decision makers, for media, for various target groups, where we have worked on materials, how do we convey and communicate the messages on sustainability, while also we have worked to raise public awareness and environmental issues with a view on basically focusing on conservation and wise use of natural resources. Then when we were established, we were looking at what are the different strategies with which we should work with community and various target groups. So first thing we found, because India is a diverse country, and first thing we found was very important is adaptability. Something which can adapt to the geographical, cultural, social and economic context. Second thing, it is very important in a country like India, you need to have a partnership to have a multiplier effect of your activities, your programs. Then we were also looking at what are the key entry points and key target groups where we can work on looking at how we can get maximum output from those groups. Networking at various levels, local, national and regional level was very important, we found. And we also felt that Center has to have a regional presence in entire country. And at the same time, we were also looking at developing cadre of professionals. So this is the strategy where institution began with. This is how Center looks at ESD approach. CE is also national implementing agency for DESD in India. And while looking at our entire experience, this is how Center looks at the way we work with various target groups. So we begin with the education and capacity building, which is a base or a foundation of any program. So there are various examples we have. We have a green school education program. We are working with the curriculum agencies to work with them, looking at how environmental education could be infused in the curriculum. We are looking at building capacity of master trainers, teachers and various other groups, maybe even textbook writers who are writing the textbooks were important. And also looking at community awareness at the same time. So education and capacity building made a very important component of our programs. Second thing which we looked into was policy links, which basically looked into by the networking and information sharing, looking at the consultation process of any decision which was taken. Recently there was a big consultation in India on adopting BT Brinjal. So looking at making informed decisions is one thing which CE works into. Then comes field demonstration. While talking about education capacity building and policy linkage, it is important to show what is happening in field, how things can be demonstrated in field so that people are able to adopt them. So these are the three spheres which interconnects each other, and this is how CE works in India. I'm just showing you how CE is spread in India. And the green dot, the big green dot is showing where I work, is the northern part of India, based in Lucknow. And we have various offices. We have 40 offices throughout country, and looking at various different programs. So because it was difficult to capture the kind of work she is doing, so I thought it would be good to share with you that the program we have in India, and one of the experience I am sharing today with you. Today the example I am sharing, a case I am sharing is from Dudhwa National Park. This is a national park in India which is 4th largest park. It was established in 1977. We got our environmental protection law in 72, and as soon as the concept of national park formation began, this was the 4th park, and it is situated on the India-Nepal border and has an area of 680 square kilometers. So you can just imagine the spread the park has. And here I'm just showing two pictures, the kind of the ecological diversity we have. One side there is you can see the huge grassland, and the other side you can see a swamp. So it is a combination of woodland, wetland and grassland. So there are tall forests. There are the main species here is sal, Shorea robusta, which is a tall tree, and if you can, like, it is the finest sal found in India. So this national park has lot of value because of its ecosystem it supports, because of the biodiversity it supports. If you look at this map, this particular national park forms one of the entity in the Tarai Arc landscape. This is called Tarai Arc landscape. This ecosystem is Tarai ecosystem because of the wetland and the swampland found in this region. So the one of the park is Dudhwa National Park, and later on one or two sanctuaries, two wildlife sanctuaries were connected with Dudhwa National Park, and it was declared as a Dudhwa Tiger Reserve also. So it is now very significant in terms of a tiger population as well. Now looking at what is the unique biodiversity it supports. Many key endangered species are supported in this park, like swamp deer, Bengal florican, rhinoceros, gharials, the tiger, and many more. So its list is very long. There are 250 birds which are part of this park, and several, like five species of deer. So there are very important hub of biodiversity, you can say. And wetlands are so attractive for the migratory birds that there is a huge flock which keep on coming to this national park. Now I'll come on the part of community. The community which is residing around Dudhwa is called Tharus. Tharus is a name which emerged. Basically, these are migrants. If you look at the history, they are coming from the Rajasthan area, which is where we have a Thar desert. You must have heard about various deserts. There is a desert called Thar, and from Thar, this name arrived, like they are called Tharus because they migrated during a war, and they settled around this park area. And they are, when the park was established, the community was moved, basically translocated from the park area, and now there are 37 villages around the park where these tribal communities are residing. There are two areas defined in India, like one is a core area and buffer area. Buffer area is like there is less restriction on the activities which is allowed, and the core area you are not allowed to do any kind of activities. So buffer area, on the fringe of the park, these communities were translocated, and then they used to get lot of material, like their livelihood were dependent on it, their life was dependent on it. So like their food, their fuel and their fodder and many other products, their entire life was around Dudhwa Park. The important point is like these communities have a large family size. They are, I have written 20 to 40, sometimes it is 40 to 50 people also in a family. So it's a huge families, and women play a very important role in the entire area. Is they collect wood, they do a lot of household work, they take care of children, they also help in farms for traditional agricultural work. And there are a lot of traditional rituals or festivals and songs which are connected with park. So this is the scenario where when we started looking at this area as a, like, where to initiate our ESG activities with the community. These are some of the pictures of the Tharuk women who are working in the area. You can see the head loads they are getting from park. So it is around 80 to 20 kg they have to do. It is almost like 5 to 6 hours they have to spend to collect these fuel woods. And similarly they are using the grass from the park in making their own this house. And then they do a lot of fishing in buffer area. So their diet depends on fish diet, which is again dependent on the ponds and wetlands which is found in the park. So they are very closely connected with the park. So it was very difficult for them to change their entire lifestyle and come out and face this restriction. So what happened when these restrictions were initiated there? You can see that it is on the border. It is India-Nepal border. So it's a remote area. It's based in remote area. There is less road connectivity. There is communication network is not that good there. If I travel there, I am unaccessible there. So you can understand there is no connectivity. Then there is also increase in tribal population. When initially government translocated them, their population was less and they were given some land holdings to do their agricultural practices. But later on the population size increased and now the land holding is same. So there was a difficulty in coping up with the number of population which has increased. There was also poverty as well as limited livelihood opportunity because being in the remote area, there was hardly any livelihood opportunities there. Then slowly the park, they began, there is a, like, if they were not allowed in the daytime, they used to go in evening and to get the park resources. So there was slowly the pressure was building on park resources. Then clashes started to begin with the government, forest department and the community. Then human-wildlife conflict began. In 77 the park was formed and from 78 to 89 there were 200 people killed by tiger. And before that there were no killing. Before the establishment of National Park there was no killing and after the National Park was established 200 people died and similarly 47 tigers died. So it was both ways. So some of tigers turned to man-eater and some of them were killed by community. So there was a major issue in the area. And then other herbivores were also coming in their agricultural fields. So there was a lot of clashes. There were some kind of compensation given by government, but somehow that was not working out. There were a lot of tribal schemes, development schemes began. There were a lot of eco-development schemes began where community was given option like some energy options. Tiger guardian scheme was started that so that people don't kill tigers when they come to their farms. So there were different schemes, but it was somehow not working. Whatever approach was taken, the community's consent or community's scenario was not taken into account. So when CE began its work there in the park area, we began there in 2005, looking at educational and conservation point of view and looking at activities which are more on participatory nature, where community takes decision, which is more on informed decision. They understand the situation, what is my need, what is why parks need to be conserved, and how I can also get benefit. The same thing which Marie has mentioned, that like healthy people, healthy park. So it was very much same case here, if you can say. We are also looking at sustainable consumption and management because they were quite dependent on park resources, and overnight you cannot make those changes. So it was very important to address that issue. Also looking at how we can strengthen livelihood so that the economic benefit is not from the park but from some other sources. So that was an important area which we decided. And then also looking at institutional mechanism, how the group will work, how things will sustain for a long time. In the meantime, we also joined a network called Regional Centers of Expertise. Vaughn will be talking later about it. And this is a network which talks about how you can bring formal, non-formal and informal education-based stakeholders and work with them to connect to ESG activities in the area. So this area we were recognized in RC Lucknow and then started working on this area with a different approach, getting other stakeholders on board and getting their help for various components which were emerging. Because there were energy needs, there were agricultural training needs, there were capacity building needs. So those needs to be tackled with the partnership. How would we begin with the ESG strategy? We looked at what are the field realities in context of environment, economic and social factors. We looked at what is the extent of dependency, how much is the dependency. We kind of took an evaluation and looked at what is the assessment of the fuel good need, what are the fodder requirement and how can we change. We need to understand the amount of pressure first and then we can look at the strategy, how we can further go. Then looking at, it was not easy, like when you're working with community, it is not like a formal education group where you have a school community where you can convey your messages very clearly.